right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Sorry, I had to turn off my camera briefly because the lights in this room interfere with the camera and they give those waves. So had to deal with that. But we can go ahead and get started for this morning. Today, we're actually shifting out of AutoCAD. And you can see this kind of coming full circle now, but we're not changing out of our current assignment. So assignment 105 actually rolls right into assignment 106. They end up being the same assignment. The difference is that this time we're going to take our cabin and build it in 3 dimensions in SketchUp. Now, just like we did in the last section where we went through AutoCAD and then we ended up, doing some collage work in Illustrator and getting a final output, a lot of what I will work through will center around the idea of collaging what you've created in Photoshop to be something a little bit more attractive, what you've created in SketchUp to be something a little bit more attractive in Photoshop, and then ultimately we'll be dropping it into InDesign. So this is your last regular assignment. Obviously, we have our final project, our portfolio that's due at the end of the semester. The other thing that I'll remind you all of is that we really don't have a lot of time left. I have 5 actual lectures counting today that I'll be giving, and there will be 6 actual class days left. Everything is due on the 5th, and I have it due on the 5th because it's the very beginning of finals. You can get it out of the way. You can work the weekend before, you can get it out of the way and be done, and then you can take all the rest of your tests during finals week. If you have a big test that's on Monday and you feel like you can't turn it in on Monday because you're studying for that big test that's on Monday, I will be accommodating and let you turn it in on Wednesday if you'd rather, but I'd like you to email me so that I know when you're planning on turning it in. Obviously, my goal is for you to get done with this class so you can concentrate on all the other classes, but I recognize that everybody has different final schedules, so I do my best to kind of accommodate and work around those schedules. So please just communicate with me what works best for you, and we'll make adjustments as necessary for you. So assignment 106, your last regular assignment, is due the Friday before finals week. So it's 12/2, December 2nd is when this one is due. The good news is we're going to do the bulk of it in class. So you don't have to stress out too much about it outside of class. We should be able to do it all in class. And I've had to make a couple modifications that are a little bit different than previous semesters because of the numbers of days that we have left. So in this assignment, you're only choosing 2 of the 3 drawings that we'll do. So we're going to do an elevation, we'll do a section, and we'll do a perspective. You're going to pick 2 of those and turn them in for assignment 106. So that means basically you have one that's a throwaway. So if it doesn't turn out or it doesn't look good, no problem. You could just toss that one and give me the other 2. So that's set up on purpose. We are going to skip the plans tutorial and lecture because I just don't have enough time to get through them all. And that one, it's there. I'll post the lecture to it from a previous semester in case you want to watch it, but it's not going to be part of what we're doing in this class. We will revisit portfolios one more time. Remember that that's coming down the pipe as your final, so don't forget about it. You should be working on it. You've now finished potentially all the way up through assignment 105, so you can get all of those into your portfolio. I also would love to review or redline any portfolios. What I've offered in the past is, during check-ins, we can of course go over them. If you want to email them to me and have me draw on them and redline them, if you send me a PDF, I'll go through and I'll make notes on it and send it back to you. That's fine as well. So we'll spend a little bit more time on that next week. It's also important for you to know that next week, even though it's Thanksgiving week, and even though all the elementary school and middle school and high school kids get the week off around here, we don't. We have regular class Monday and Wednesday of next week. So I know people are traveling, and actually I'm going to be traveling too, so I'm going to be on a different connection. So hopefully it'll all work. But we will have normal class. I'll still be posting assignments or your lab exercises. I'll still be posting lectures. If for some reason the connection isn't good enough for me, I will give you recordings of those lectures, but I'll still be available on Zoom during our regular times so that we can talk and make sure that you get everything taken care of. So just throwing that out there. You guys might be traveling too, but it's kind of a crazy week. It always is. Actually, when we used to be in person, I remember the Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, I maybe would get 1/3 of the students. So if I had a class of 30, I might get 10 that day. And it was consistent like that every semester or every fall that I taught. So I know that's the way it is, but because of the 16-week semester, we don't have a lot of extra time. And we get back, we have 1 full week, and then it's finals week. So we have to kind of stay rolling in this whole thing. So we will have work to do. This is assignment 106. We've talked about that, but let's move back into our exercise 124. This is what we're working on today. And really the goal of today and your goal this weekend coming up as homework is going to be converting your assignment 105 line drawings from AutoCAD into a 3D model in SketchUp. Now, the good news is SketchUp is pretty easy to get your head around. It's pretty easy to model with. It's pretty intuitive. And unless you have a building that is very, very curvy, it's going to be really easy to work with in SketchUp. So if you end up with a building that's too curvy or you're struggling with it, you can always simplify. You can straighten up the walls and do that. Remember, this is a grade based on your representation of your building, not the design of your building. So this is about learning how to represent your buildings, not so much how good your building is, because it's fundamentally not a design studio. So here's our exercise 124. And essentially what we're doing is we're bringing in information. And then once we bring in our AutoCAD files into SketchUp, we're going to work through how to build our model. And I'm going to show you a bunch of strategies for that. And then if you can take time today, obviously, and through the weekend to kind of finalize your drawing, you'll be in much better shape going into next week because you'll have the bulk of the model done and you can work with it. Couple notes kind of to remind you of, and you'll see this when I use my live example. You don't have to model the full building. We can leave parts of it unmodeled. We don't have to add furniture everywhere. You can, of course, use the 3D warehouse if you want to bring in some components, but this is kind of general. We're just trying to get one elevation view. We're not doing all four. We're getting one elevation view. We're not doing the plan. We're doing the section and we're doing the perspective. So you can really concentrate on modeling part of the house and not necessarily all of the house or all of the cabin. And that might help you get it pretty well resolved. I'll show you my example file in just a little bit, which would be sufficient for what you need. One last reminder in part 3 here, and that is that on Monday, December 5th, your portfolio is due. So we want to make sure that you're not forgetting about that and that you're getting that done as well. So that's there. It's coming up. It's coming really quickly. So don't forget about it. So let's go ahead and let's work to kind of get our model into SketchUp. Obviously, thus far, we have our Autodesk, our AutoCAD file. But if we move into SketchUp, and I should also point out that I'm working in the SketchUp that's on the lab computers. This is SketchUp Pro, and there is a distinct difference between the SketchUp online version and the SketchUp Pro version. One of which is bringing in the AutoCAD file. So at least for bringing in the AutoCAD file, I would highly recommend that you use the remote desktop to do this part of it. After that, you could save it and you could do some work on the online only version because most of what you need from then on would be available in the online only version, the free version. But
and
sorry, go ahead. No,
if we decided to go for one of the student options, is that more like the web version or more like the pro version?
No, if you actually purchase the student license, it's almost identical to the pro version that's on the school laptops or the school remote desktop.
Okay, I noticed there's a few options with the student license.
You know, I should double check and see what the current licenses are. They change these over time. So let's look. Let's see what they're offering now. Oh, I have to accept cookies here. Okay, so it looks like you're at $55 a year for the students for SketchUp Studio. This will, yeah, here we go. What's included? You get SketchUp Pro, which is exactly what you get on the school's remote desktop, and then they give you a bunch of other like add-ons and stuff. So it's basically the same thing.
I think if you want to pay more than 55, you get some different rendering options and.
Oh, it's probably a different rendering. We're not doing any rendering in this class direct in SketchUp, so you don't need anything beyond that. So this 55 base version, if you want to purchase it, that's all you need.
Okay.
For what we're doing. Actually, we'll be modeling in SketchUp and then bringing stuff out into Photoshop to do some collage work on top of it. So I've opened up SketchUp, and the first thing that happens is I get this welcome to SketchUp splash screen. We want to be working in architectural inches because that's what we worked in for our AutoCAD. So we need to make sure that these match. So our units in AutoCAD were architectural. We want to make sure that SketchUp is also architectural. So I'm going to click on the architectural, and it's going to open up SketchUp. And SketchUp by default, when you create a brand new file, always puts a little person in for scale. This is classic SketchUp. And each version that SketchUp updates gets new people. So you can tell what version it is by who's standing there. I'm going to go ahead and erase that person because we don't need it. I did that by just right-clicking on it and then choosing erase. Let me just reorganize here. I need to move my Zoom window over so it's not in the way of what I'm working on. There we go. And so I'd like to walk through the interface because it's very different than any program that we've used thus far. First off, we have a traditional file menu structure at the very top, followed by a toolbar that contains some very basic tools. Some of them are hidden underneath others. So we've got our regular line tool, and then underneath we have a freehand tool. We've got our rectangle tool, but underneath that we've got a few of the other tools that are available, etc. This is not my favorite toolbar. I actually really like the large tool set. So if you go to the view menu, view and then toolbars, you can actually check the box for large tool set. That's the one I prefer when I'm working. It has a lot more tools on it, but it's not enabled by default. So you have to enable it by default, but it just somehow works a little bit easier for me. So I tend to enable that large tool set. There are duplicate tools up top here, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. On the right side, we have what they call trays. It's kind of like our windows in Adobe, the Adobe products where we have layers and whatever. They don't call layers, they call them tags. So we'll be working with tags today. And there are other things that we also will work with over time. We won't work too much with materials, but we will work with components. We'll definitely work with the styles section. And so I'll explore a lot of those ideas as we get through the class. There is also an instructor section right here. So if you pick a particular tool, it will give you information about that tool. So if you've never worked in SketchUp before, you can always kind of read what's going on in SketchUp. Couple things to note, and I want to point out a few things as we get started that have to do with the 3D interface of SketchUp. We do have I can't even talk this morning. We do have two axes that are flat on the ground. Those are similar to our axes that are in AutoCAD, the red being the X, the green being the Y. But we have a third axis that's going up. That's the blue axis, and that's the Z axis because we're working in 3 dimensions. Okay. The other thing about SketchUp is if I were to draw a particular shape at any point in time in my lower right corner, you can see that it has dimensions listed. If I wanted to actually type in a value, let's say 4 feet, I could type in 4 apostrophe, comma, 4 apostrophe, and then enter, and it would create a 4 foot by 4 foot square. So I'm clicking and holding with my mouse, type 4 feet, comma, 4 feet, enter. So much like the command line. So you notice that I created those 2 4 foot by 4 foot squares. SketchUp has a weird kind of perspective view where the further you are to one side or the other, the less something looks like a square anymore. So if I'm over here and I say 4 feet, comma, 4 feet, right? That one looks kind of like a square, maybe. This one definitely doesn't look like a square. If I'm back over here and I draw it, 4 feet, comma, 4 feet, comma, 4 feet. That one definitely doesn't look like a square. Those are, in fact, all 4 foot squares. And if I were to orbit my view, and I can do that by pressing the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel on my mouse, or I can use the orbit tool right here. If I were to use the orbit tool and we start to look down at them, as we move different views, we could start to see that, yes, they all are, in fact, squares. It's just when we're looking at them from an angle there, we're not seeing them all as squares. So I like to point that out early in SketchUp so that people aren't confused, because it definitely confuses me at the very beginning of working with SketchUp because it just doesn't look quite right. That's how the SketchUp view works, though. So when you create a shape, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this shape up. I'm using the push-pull tool here. We'll cover this a little bit more in a minute. When you create a shape, by default, SketchUp attaches shapes together. Let me do it, the push-pull on this one as well, and then I'll show you. And this may be review for some of you, but it's worth kind of explaining it. So if I were to take this shape here, and I were to use the move tool, and I were to move it so that these two shapes connected together, as soon as they touch, they're now connected. So if I went to move them, they're now attached to each other. And so one of the strategies, if you don't want your shapes to be attached, is before you move them together, if you want to keep them separate, select the shape, right click on it and say make group. Likewise, I would take this shape right here, select it, right click and say make group. And now if I were to take this shape and I were to move it next to that shape, they still snap together, but if I went moved it again, they would stay separate. So I'm a big fan in SketchUp of making groups as you create things, because if you don't, they end up being kind of attached together and they get more difficult to work with. So it's part of the strategy of working in SketchUp is kind of grouping objects together. So I've selected all of those. I'm going to right click and erase them. And then let's talk about bringing in our AutoCAD. So I have my AutoCAD saved from last class. I can go ahead and bring that AutoCAD in. I'll go to File and then Import. And we'll leave it set for all supported types. And I'm going to look in my flash drive, or excuse me, my OneDrive for my building. So let's go here. And let me do, I'm thinking I might do this older one because it has a sloped roof, just so you can see me create the sloped roof. You know, I might not have it. Bear with me for just a second. Well, we'll use the base drawing here. Let me go ahead and import it. And it's going to bring in the AutoCAD drawing. It's going to give us the summary of all the things that it brought in. We'll go ahead and say close, and there it is. Now, this is where you start to see what garbage got brought in along with your AutoCAD. So it looks like way over here, I have an extra copy of my floor plan. Not sure why it's there. Right now, if I try to select it, right, it makes this, it comes in as a component. So I can right click on it and I can explode it, but that means everything will attach together. I can also click on it and then double click to get inside of it, in which case I can then select individual pieces. So now that I'm inside of it, I can right click and say erase, and that gets rid of that piece. And what I'm going to do to kind of organize here is I'm actually going to go in, start deleting things. So like I said, layers in SketchUp aren't called layers, they're called tags. So I'm going to open up the tags on the right-hand side here, and I'm going to start cleaning up my drawing. So first off, the topography, I don't need that. I'm going to go ahead and right click on it, and I'm going to delete that tag. When I do that, it says, do you want to move the objects onto a different layer or delete the objects? I want to go ahead and delete them. So I'll go ahead and say, okay. The idea here is that I'm trying to pare down to just the parts that I need. So as I continue on here, I don't need the furniture. So let's right click on that and delete the tag. And again, we'll delete all the parts of it. There they are. Now, as we start to zoom in here and we look at the floor plan a little bit more, there's a lot of things in this floor plan that I just don't need that I can end up bringing in or deleting a little bit later on. We can see what's on a various layer by actually turning those layers on and turning them off. This one's a little bit complicated because on this kitchen layer, you see that I have my windows. They weren't layered correctly, but I also have parts of my kitchen. So I might have to, I might have to go in and actually manually delete some parts of this. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll select them, right click and erase. I could also press the delete key on the keyboard. Now I remember, yeah, if you're on a Mac, the delete key won't work via the remote desktop. So Go ahead and just right click to erase on all of these. And now everything that's left is just those windows. I want those to stay. So I'm going to, when I right click to delete this, this is where I'm going to assign to another tag, and I'm going to go ahead and assign it to the walls layer like that. And we'll go ahead and say, okay. So it got deleted, but now it's on the walls layer. So what I don't need is I don't need the roof lines here. I don't need that. So let's go ahead and delete that. We're going to delete the entities. I'm not even sure what this section cut is. Let's zoom out and make sure that it's not something that I need. Nope, not something that I need. I'm going to right click and delete that tag. So the cleaner I make this, the better off it's going to be long term. So there's nothing, there appears to be nothing on layer 1. Let's go ahead and delete that tag. Now my windows, that one's kind of an iffy one because I need some parts of the windows. If the frames of the windows are still there, I think we're okay. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the windows. I'm right click and delete the tag. Now you don't have to delete them all, but a lot of times the, oops. I don't think I deleted them. Let's undo. Ah, there it is. Okay. Right click, delete tag. Sorry, we need to delete. There we go. And now those have gone away. You can leave all of these, but they tend to get in the way as you start to build your model. So the more you pare it down, I think the better off you're going to be. So we're going to leave the walls, obviously. The guides here, we don't need them. I'm going to right click and delete that. The furniture, we don't need that. Right click, delete tag. There. Elevations, I'm going to need. Doors, I do not need. So I'll right click and delete that.
How did you select some of the kitchen when you were selecting individually?
Okay, so right, so that, and that's fine. If you're outside of the component, when you go to select it, it's going to select the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you double click on it, that'll let you to get in. And for example, I don't want this table here. So now that I'm inside the component, I can just select it and then I can delete it. So I'll right click and say erase. And you can see that I'm actually missing a few other little bits of lines as I was starting to clean this up. Furthermore, I don't need these double lines for the for these windows. So we'll go ahead and select those and we'll delete those. So it's a lot of times it's easier to work with the layers and delete by layer, but other times you just need to go in and manually delete some things. Like that little extra line was obviously on an incorrect layer, so we'll go in and select it. Selecting, by the way, works the same way as AutoCAD. Selection from left to right is only what's fully contained. From right to left is everything that's inside, everything that it touches. So the selections are similar in that case. The bed layer here, we don't need that. And so we have the elevations. We have something called untagged. It won't let me delete it because I need a new tag. I'm going to create a new tag. So I clicked on that little plus sign and I'm going to call this 3D. And then I can right click and let me delete this one. Oh, let me make this one current. Sorry. Now I'll be able to delete it. No. Well, it doesn't appear that I'm going to be able to delete that. Okay, that's all right. So what I end up with is I end up with the elevation views and I end up with the walls. At this point, oh, looks like I do need to get rid of that line there. Perfect. Okay. So now at this point, I can get out of the component, but I'm going to go ahead and break this component up so that I can make individual groups of each one of these pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the whole thing and go to explode. And when I do that, it breaks these all into just regular lines. But what I can do is I can then select each one of the elevation views, and I can right click and say either make component or make group. I tend to choose a group, but if you'd prefer to make a component, you can make a component. Components are slightly different than groups in how they're treated. In our purposes right now, it makes no difference which one you choose. I'm going to go ahead and stick with a group. I'll right click on this one and say make group. I'll right click on this one and say make group. And just like I was talking about earlier in lecture, by making these groups, I'm causing these not to attach to anything else. So they're all separate objects. Let's go ahead and move those closer to the axes over here. So I'm going to go ahead and with them all selected, I'll use the move tool. And I'll go ahead and move these closer to the axes like that. All right. So now that I have all of those pieces, let's think about how they are lining up. So first off, I can take these elevation views and I can actually stand them up and use them as kind of references for my building. So how would I go about standing them up? Well, there is a rotate tool in SketchUp right here, but it's very difficult to rotate without a three-dimensional object to rotate off of. So what I actually recommend doing is I recommend creating a little box right at the floor line. So my floor is right here. I'll create a little box like that. I'll use the push-pull tool here to bring it up in 3D. Now, the dimensions of this don't matter. But once I have that box on my view, I can then use it by selecting it and my elevation view with the rotate tool to rotate in that plane. So you can see that rather than just rotating around in the flat plane, as I move to this face, I can get the rotation tool to turn out to be, come on, there you go. I can have it turn out to be the red protractor right there. And of course, it doesn't want to do it the way I want it to. Try it. Sometimes you just have to fuss with it a little bit. Well, we'll go ahead and do it from the midpoint here instead of the, so I'll click, and this is the point around which I want to rotate, and I can fold that point straight up. Now we know that I was a little bit low when I did that because I moved it from the midpoint, so I will move it vertically. Now, the elevation, not my little box, and we will go ahead and move just the elevation from there up to the midpoint there. The only reason I care is because I want my floor plan right here to match up. If I came straight across, and you can see that the line turns green when I do that, it should be green and it should come over and meet that point there, which is my finished floor height. So I just want to confirm that that's doing what it's supposed to and at the correct height. Once that's done, I can go ahead and erase this little box. And I can also erase this line that kind of ties it together. There it is. So let's do the same thing over here with this view. So once again, I'll create a box. And then I'll use the push-pull tool to make it three-dimensional. Then I'll use my rotate tool. Oops. Right there. And we're going to rotate this up. Oops. Helps if I select it first. Sorry. There we go. Now we use my rotate tool. And we're going to rotate that so that it's up. And you can actually see it kind of snap. It'll snap to a blue line right there. And that way it's standing up correctly. Now, likewise, I have to make sure that this lines up. So if I came from my floor plan over here across as red, that's where it's supposed to be. And it's currently too low. So I could go ahead and move. Oops, they're attached. Sorry. I need to move just this piece. We'll go to move. And there it is. That's lined up. Then we'll continue. I can go ahead and erase that box. And we'll orbit. Oops, sorry, I'm going to do that several times. Rhino is right click to orbit, and I get lost and forget that I'm in SketchUp, not Rhino. All right, and then we'll do another one here. And I'll again use the push pull tool to make it a little bit more three-dimensional. And then we'll select all of it, and we'll go ahead and rotate again. Until it's standing up. We need to confirm that it's at the correct height. So we'll go from right here, come over right along the green axis. There it is. And that is a little bit high. So I'm going to take this and we're going to move it down. Like that. Then we can delete that box. We don't need it. Right click and erase. We don't need that line either. We actually don't need this line either. And I'll orbit, and you can see where I'm going with this. We'll have one more to do here. This one I have no way of judging where it is, so I'm just creating a quick box, and we'll then move it after the fact. So let's go like that. Take the whole thing. And rotate it. There it is. And this one is really hard to judge where the height is because I have no real base on where the floor is. So what I'm going to do is I'll pull the height over from here along that red axis. Like that. And then I can take this whole thing and move it. I didn't quite get it all. Let's go to move. And we'll go from that corner till we meet it there. And so now that I've done this, I have all of my views set up. And these are going to help me build out my 3D model. Okay, so first thing I need to do is start thinking about the floor plans. And so we'll come in here and I have a couple options. First thing I can do is I can go ahead with a rectangle and just draw a big rectangle that essentially covers my whole building. So we want it to be big enough to cover the whole building. There it is. And what some people do is they'll go ahead and at this point explode the floor plan that they created. And this should divide up that rectangle. If it does, that's great, and it saves you a bunch of steps. If it doesn't, you may be stuck tracing over your building using the line tool. I'm going to go ahead and try the explode technique. So at this point, I'll select my floor plan, I'll right click and I'll say explode. And we'll see if it's done it. Okay, it did do some of it. So at this point, I could delete the parts that I don't want. I know outside here, we don't need that piece. So I can go ahead and right click and erase. We can get rid of these two lines. I'll right click and erase. I can get rid of that section. We can right click and erase. And get rid of this section. I can right click and erase. And I can get rid of that section right there. I'll right click and erase there. So in here, it has divided up a lot of the walls, but here, for example, it hasn't divided because I don't have a line that goes across. So I'll have to come back with my line tool and draw a line that goes across, and that then separates some of these shapes. So let's see, that's now separate. That line is a little bit extra. Let's go ahead and delete that piece like that. This is separate. Looks like it did trace some of it. It looks like I have to close that one off. So we'll come over here and we'll close this one off. And that then separated that from this. That's not quite separate. And this is just one of those you have to work your way through. So you may have to come in and you may have to do some extra tracing. So let me trace over that section. Let me trace over this. I'll trace over this. All right, we'll trace over that section right there. And so, like I said, this is just part of SketchUp. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of extra tracing like that. Sometimes you could use the rectangle tool and actually just go ahead and draw right over the top. Sometimes that'll work. And we'll keep working our way through. Looks like this one hasn't quite been separated out yet. So let's trace it. And sometimes that's all it takes. The way SketchUp works is that this surface is separate from that surface because of that line. So if I were to delete this line segment right here, this surface is now continuous with that surface. I still need to add these lines. Now that one's separate. That one's separate. And let me confirm those are all separate. That one's not yet. There we go. A few more in here. We've got this little post. And sometimes all it takes is retracing one line to get them to separate out. This looks pretty good so far. That section still needs a little bit of attention. And we can confirm, yes, those are all little separate pieces. A little bit more attention up here. I think that probably did it. Perfect. So now that I have all of those separate, I can start to use that push-pull tool that we talked about earlier to build up these walls. So we can see over here that this building has a height that's equivalent to that. So if I use the push-pull tool on, say, this little wall, I can pull it up till it matches up with that height right there. Likewise, I can take this wall here and I can pull it up till it matches that height. So I'm using this as a reference. I also, this piece of the wall is shorter, therefore I should separate those two. So I'll draw a line that goes across right there so that I can pull this separate from that piece there. So we'll go ahead and use the push-pull tool and we'll pull this one up. And again, we're just snapping to our other pieces. We can use the push-pull and we can, there we go, pull this one up to right there. And then obviously these are all little windows. So we'll take these surfaces. I'm going to hold down Shift and select all of them at once. And we'll use the push-pull. Nope, it's not going to let me do it all at once. Sometimes SketchUp has these kinds of little quirks. So I'll have to do them all separate. Like that. Like that. And like that. So I was able to create that first set of walls based on my lines. Now there are extra lines. So you saw that it pulled up all these individual divisions. I don't need all of those. I could go back and I could delete them. So I can right click and erase each of those and make this back into a continuous wall like that. Now, what about, you say, when I have something like these windows on the end and they're not full height? Well, I need to kind of know how big they are. So that's where these come in. So I know that my base of the window would start from right here. And so if I click on that corner and I come over again and it stays green, I can get to where I snap to that edge. And that right there is the bottom of my windows. So I could then draw straight across and that fills in that part. I could come in here, draw straight across to right there. and then draw from here to right there. And we're starting to fill this in to right there. See how I'm starting to build that out. Now I can look at where the top of the window would be, right here. So we're using our AutoCAD for our advantage here because we've already spent time developing this. So there, and there. I have to go from here to here. That fills that in. And then obviously we could fill in the top right there, like that. Once I have this, then I can go in and I can start to clean it up. So we can obviously delete these two lines. So we don't need those. We can erase those. And then we can clean up these other lines. So I could take these lines here. I'm just holding down Shift as I select them. I'll right click and say erase. I'll do the same thing along the top. I'll right click and I'll say erase. I'll right click and I'll say erase. Now, these obviously would separate out my windows. Like that. I'll right click and I'll say erase. And so that is roughly the window outline. I would have to do some cleanup on the inside here. If I orbit around here, you can see that the inside hasn't been cleaned up yet either. But as I start to do that and I see that from the outside, at this point, I can embellish these windows if I wanted to. Now, again, this is not a requirement. Minimum, we just want to get the windows. First thing I could do is I could make this surface a different material just so that we could see it as a window. So for example, I could go over here to materials and I can add, let's look for glass. And so I could take this and I could apply it to those, just so we can kind of see that they would be glass. I can also embellish this a bit more. I could use the push-pull and I could actually push this surface back just a little bit. So I could say, let's go back by an inch. And then there's a little bit of a reveal there. Or we could say 1 inch. That was, sorry, not correct. 1 inch, not 1 foot. 1 inch. 1 inch. And 1 inch. Just to kind of give a little bit there. The other thing that I could do if I wanted to is I could use the offset tool, which is right here. Oh, excuse me, there, that one. And I could, on this surface, give a frame of, say, 1.5 inches, like that. And then I could actually change the material of that frame. So I could go back, sorry, to my materials here. And we could change it back to, you know, wood, for example. And I could make the frame of the window wood if I wanted to. So you're just seeing how this kind of develops. When we do our exports, we're not going to be using any of the materials. The materials are just here for your own benefit. So it's just to help you see what's going on in a particular building. When it comes to something like the front door, right, I have it kind of drawn. There's the height. So all I would need to do is pull this height right here over to where that front door would go. And then we can draw over to there, and then we can draw over to there, and then we get that surface. I could also at this point use the push-pull, and I could take that surface, oops. There it is. And we can use push-pull. And I could pull that up to where it matches up with the building. Again, I could come in and I could delete those extra lines. I could take that line away, and I could take that line away as well. Now, sometimes you'll run across a line, and I haven't done this yet, where when you delete it, it deletes part of the surface. In that scenario, if you delete it and it deletes part of the surface, go ahead and just leave that line in place. It's not the end of the world. It's definitely something that we can repair afterwards in Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and, delete this. And then I need to pull up this little chunk of wall right here. And we'll use the push-pull to pull it up like that. Now, in my building, I ended up with a flat roof across the top. That makes it pretty easy. It's a matter of connecting lines together to create that part of the roof. Now, if you want, you can finish all the walls first and then group all the walls together before you start working on the roof. And I would actually recommend doing that, because when you start working on the roof, in all likelihood, it's going to start attaching to the walls, and then it's going to be harder to work with. So think about doing that. I did do the roof here, and I'll go ahead and do it. I'm going to come over right like that. After I've created it, I do need to delete this surface, or maybe better yet, I should actually draw the height of this surface. We'll have that come over right like that. Right like that. Then I would delete just that part of the surface. Now the push-pull works in multiple directions, so I can still use the push-pull tool right here, and I could actually push that. Oh, come on. It's sticking to my other little lines there. So let me undo this. And in this scenario, it's probably better to go ahead and just draw it. So we'll come over here, and we'll come right to there. That draws that. We need to get underneath right in here. And let's see where that would go. Actually, it's probably easier to do this from the outside. And then we need to fill this part in from here all the way back to right there. And then that part fills in. So as I've done before, now it's a matter of deleting and kind of cleaning up. So we'll clean up that piece. And then we could go in and we could erase all of these little pieces along the top there. We could erase this little piece on the side, etc. So this was all set at the floor height. So this is where the floor was. The stairs should actually be going down from here. So we may need to do some modifications of these surfaces. So I might do the push-pull and push this down by a certain amount. So let's say down by 6 inches. And this one might go down by, I have to do 6 inches first. We'll do that by 6 inches. We'll do that by 6 inches. It's just limiting how much I can do. This one can then go down another 6 inches, as can this one, and as can this one. We could then delete this front and delete that extra line. And you can see I'm working my way through. So let's go down each one of these. It's another foot. So this would go down 12 inches. And this would go down 6 inches. And so you can see I'm starting to build out the stairs going down here like that. But obviously I would need at this point to fill in this wall coming down. So we could draw this the rest of the way down. Like that. We could come back. And draw that part down. Like that. And then fill that part in. So we could then delete this. And we could delete this as well. And that just built up the side. Now, if I had it where it was, and I really should find the one with the sloping roof. If I had it with the sloping roof, it's just a matter of connecting the dots on the sloping roof. So for example, if I had a sloping roof that was on this elevation, and bear with me because this is not going to be the prettiest elevation in the world. But let's say that I had drawn a sloping roof on this. It's a matter of just transferring that information over to this model here. So like I said, if you're going to do the roof and when you're going to do the roof, I suggest making a group or a component out of the floor plan. I'm going to go ahead in this case and make a component just because it'll make my life a little bit easier. We'll call this floor plan. There we go. Then I'll start working on the roof. So I would go ahead and I would pull a line across like this. We already know that it was lining up with my eaves. So I'd come up to right there and I go down to right there. This end is a little bit trickier because it's on a diagonal. So I'd come up to right there and I'd come down to right there. You then trace it and you draw that part of it. That's going to give me the first slope and that's going to give me the second slope. And so you can see I'm starting to build up that line there. These pieces ultimately can be deleted. So we can erase those. We can erase this. And you can see that by keeping these as separate pieces, I'm helping myself out. Now I can continue to work with these. I can use the push-pull to add some thickness to it. So I could use push-pull and I could go either this way or this way, depending, to add some thickness. So let's go down maybe by 12 inches. I could take this one and I could go down this way by 12 inches. Looks like it's a little bit past where I need to go right there. So I might figure out where that point is. And then maybe we'll come back with the push-pull and adjust it. Really, a lot of SketchUp is that push-pull. Oh, come on. Let me do it. Well, it's not going to let me do it. So maybe I'd come in after the fact and I'd draw. Come on. That line in and I'd trim it off afterward. So I could come in and I could delete that part of it. We could delete this part of it. And then I could trace this along there. And then I could trace this back up along that side. One. And then let's flip this around to right there. And that then fills in that lower part of the roof. That would let me get rid of that little extra piece and make the interior kind of a little bit tighter as it starts to come together on that wall. So they're just, little options, little things that you can work on along the way. But again, those are finer details should you want to do it. You could also very easily just fill in the top and not have any of it exposed. So we could just make it a triangle and get rid of it. Just depends on what the look is that you're going for. So I would continue to work through and kind of tweak that. That roof being its own separate entity from the plan itself. All right, so these are all, again, just options as you start to work through. What I'd like you to start with is extruding all of the walls up. So get your AutoCAD in, extrude the walls up. I think you will learn a lot in this process about your building. Recognize that if your building evolves or you change your mind or something changes, the floor plan changes, the roof plane changes, you decide you don't want a pitched roof anymore, you want a flat roof, all of that is perfectly acceptable. You can make edits at this point. So it doesn't have to be the exact same cabin that you did in 105. So it can have evolution, it can change a little bit. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Our goal, again, for today and for this weekend is to get as much of this done as you possibly can. I'm going to save this. And actually, I should have saved it earlier just in case it crashed. So let's make sure it goes into my folder for today. I'm going to save, but I also, before I let you go, I wanted to open up the one that I had done that I'm going to use as my example. Let me go into it's the one I was going to use as my example, and let's get into the perspective view so you can see it a little bit better. And I've spent a lot of time modeling that edge of the house. So when I do my elevation, it'll be that elevation. When I do my perspective, it'll be that perspective. When I do my section, I'll cut through my building and look out the other direction. And you'll see that the back of the building is modeled from a massing standpoint, but it's not really detailed. And that's okay, because I'm going to concentrate on this view. So if you run out of time, at least get one of the views really nicely done, because then you can do your elevation next Monday. Right? So concentrate on getting one side kind of nicely resolved. Hopefully it's the most beautiful side, because that's the side we're going to kind of work with. But that'll get you a large part of the way there. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to stick around. Let's come back at 9:15 for our first check-in group, and I'll see you then.